Well, we had some ice and snow and stuff last week, so we just had a small group. At first I thought we're just going to have 3 or 4, and then it grew to about 10 or 12. So I went ahead and I thought I was going to save this week's or last week's, but I went ahead and did it, but I feel the need to kind of bring some of you up to speed. So I'll go back and review a little bit of that chapter. It's a strange one. It was the strangest one that some of the commentators said of the whole Bible to understand. That was these 4 kings against 5 kings, and they had a big battle, and in the midst of the battle, some of them had rebelled against others, and then in the midst of it, they captured Lot, and they carried him and his family off. And then that got Abram involved because he had to go rescue Lot, and Abram took off with a pretty good bunch of guys. There's 318 and warriors to go fight these other kings and defeat them and rescue Lot and bring him back. And then as he's coming back after defeating them and bringing back the booty, the kings who were with him. The king of Sodom went out to meet Abram in the valley of Shaveth, that is the king's valley, and then King of Sodom goes out, and then King Melchizedek of Salem brings out bread and wine, and he was a priest of the Most High God. And he blessed Abram and said, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. And then the king of Sodom said to Abram. So we've got king of Sodom coming out to meet him. Then King Melchizedek comes out and does what he does. And then back to the king of Sodom, which is a very obvious insertion into the story of the Melchizedek part. But anyway, then the king of Sodom said to Abraham, "Give me the persons," meaning the people that Abram had rescued, but you take the goods, the material, the booty, the material wealth for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have sworn to the Lord God Most High, maker of heaven and earth," using the same expressions that Melchizedek used. However, Melchizedek is a Canaanite and wouldn't have really had the same understanding of who his God was. But from retrospect, and a lot of times we'll have the same idea that there is one God, but people experience God differently, and different cultures come up with different names and different ways of worshiping. But we would sense that if they're connecting with a spiritual entity, then that spiritual entity is God. No matter what name or belief systems they may develop within their own culture, they're still relating to the same God. But anyway, Abram uses those same expressions to say he made this vow that he would not take a thread or a sandal or anything that is yours, so that you might not say, "I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten." In other words, I'll turn in an expense account for what it costs to go do it, and you can reimburse me expenses, but I'm not going to take the booty and get rich off of this enterprise. But he goes on and says, "But the share of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre," meaning his allies, even though he's going to be magnanimous and not receive the booty, he didn't want to make promises for others who might need that. It's up to them. If they want to refuse, they can. If they want to accept, they can. But he's not going to speak for his allies. And so he says, let them take their share. So that's where we ended up last week. And in that regard, let's see, there were a few things I want to reinforce. And one of them was that in this text, it says Abram the Hebrew. And all of the scholars made a big do about giving him that title because a Hebrew was not a name the Israelites called themselves. It was a name given to them by others. And so this was strange. And so they get a whole history of the development of this Hebrew word, and it comes from Akkadian word Habiru, Habiru, and it had meanings of foreign mercenaries, strangers in the land, immigrants into the land, people who lived on the fringes and the margins and made themselves servants, either mercenaries or enslaved themselves into the service of those who were in the land. In other words, when famine would come and you were desperate and you needed to survive, you would do anything, and sometimes they would sell themselves into the service of whoever was in the land in order to get the food and the care to stay alive. So anyway, that they went through that whole thing of the meaning and the origin of Hebrew basically was strangers, not natives of the land. They were somebody who had come in. And that applied to people doing different things. Sometimes they were mercenaries that went out in battle, and sometimes they were just house slaves, and sometimes they were a name given to the shepherds who would come and go from here and there, but they lived on the margins of the land. But it was a name that they called them as the immigrants or undocumented people and so forth. Anyway, then the story moves into Abraham's rescue of Lot, and I mentioned the number 318 may seem like a small number compared to raising armies, and in one sense they thought maybe that's what it was for, is the small number of men that Abram had went out and whooped up on all these kings and their armies and beat them. And but then on the other hand, it seems like a huge number to us when we just think of Abraham and Sarah and their tent and had a few sheep around and one or two servants. This 318 fighting men. I mean, that's not the little boys and the older men. It's, the men in their prime physical strength to go out and be warriors. So that meant a huge number of people under Abram's leadership. So it gives a picture of Abraham as a warrior prince who had a big bunch of folks under his leadership. So anyway, it's a different image than we have anywhere else of Abraham in the Genesis story. So that becomes something interesting that will come up later. But this offering of the tithe to Melchizedek, when he blesses him, it says that Abraham gave him 1/10 of everything. And then that's the end of that, and then the king of Sodom comes out and talks to him. So the question was raised about the tithe. Exactly what was your question? Do you remember? I told you we'd pick it up last.
Was he the first tither?
Was he the first tither? Well, they think that the Yahwist version, if it was the earliest date, would be around the 10th century, and so it would have been one of the earliest tithers. But for it to make it into the text, as they are borrowing things from much more ancient times, then it probably went back before then. But this is the first mentioned. First time we find it in our scriptures, and but the whole question of the tithe comes up and is dealt with several times. The tithe in this story is, according to Brueggemann, was not a free will offering, but it was a formal obligation of a subordinate to the superior. When you come into the king's presence, you're supposed to bring presents, bring offerings to show that that respect and that this person has power over you. And in one sense, you are paying for that king to be strong and powerful in order to be, if they're over you, they're also a protection for you and everybody else. But to be a protector, then they need resources. They need to feed their army and so forth. And so the people being protected have to provide the resources that'll let that protection happen. But it is a 10%. It's not 8% or 1% or 5%. It's 10%, and it stays, pretty much that 1/10. Now, have you all noticed a difference at the offering time since David has been here from Muzan's time? What is the difference you've noticed?
Well, when they come down, present the
Uh-huh.
the offer.
Right, okay. That's one of them at the end, and I think I've mentioned that before, the whole idea of the collection, if it goes to the back and then disappears, it doesn't symbolically say we're offering it to God. We don't go as far as it's done in a lot of places, is you bring it back and you put it on the altar. Okay, you get a gold star. David has been saying God's tithes and our offerings. Anybody else caught that?
Dr. Biggs didn't.
No, Dr. Biggs didn't express it that way. It was our tithes and offerings, but it's a distinction between our offerings and God's tithes. Anybody have an idea what that means? It's His. It's not ours that we give. It's already God's. And that comes from an understanding of the biblical places where tithe is lifted up and is used. And so, sort of like Abram, it's an obligation when he comes in the presence of the king Melchizedek. And so you're fulfilling an obligation. And in one sense, you might look at it as paying rent. Everything we have is God's gift. We're paying rent on our body, on the world that God has blessed us with, and all the beauty and wonders that we can take in that are there for us. When you go to a show, a movie, you got to pay for it. But somebody had to provide it and so forth. Or another image might be like a sharecropper. Anybody been a sharecropper? Joyce has been a sharecropper as a kid. And some of our relatives, ancestors were sharecroppers. What that means is you don't own your land. You are allowed to farm this land that somebody else owns, but not for free. You owe a portion of what you produce to the landowner. Often it was half or more, a lot more than 10%. So if God owns all that we have and all that we are, it's kind of like what we owe God, because God owns everything. We're just sharecroppers or stewards of what we have. And therefore, that is obligatory. It's not a free will offering. But, if you... I was senior pastor and solo pastor for a long time, and I made the effort, whenever someone wanted to join, I always visited with the folks in their home before they joined to go over with them what are they looking for in a church, so that I would know how to help them find that, but also to go over what's expected of members. If you're going to make this commitment, you need to understand what that commitment's about. A lot of couples get married and they don't understand the commitment that's involved, and that's what premarital counseling's about. And when I do that, I tell them, you're not just marrying each other, you got the in-laws. And I ask questions that are big questions. Each one, you've always gone home. When you're in college, you go home for Christmas, and your parents expect you to be there for Christmas. Now you get married, you've got 2 sets. Who gets you on Christmas? And, how do you decide those things? Those are issues that once you get married, bam, those are right there. There you have to deal with all of these issues. But anyway, with someone joining the church, I bring up what's expected and so forth. And in that, I would always talk about, the standard is the tithe. Well, what does that mean? Before or after taxes and stuff. But anyway, there was one couple who were coming from a more conservative tradition. They said, and I asked them if they understood, and they said, boy, right off, yes, we understand. The tithe is God's, 10%. And then after that is what we give. And so they were going to pledge about 15% because the tithe was God's and they wanted to give more. And after I went from their house, woohoo! Here's somebody who understands. Because so many, when I was serving that church, there were young families moving to Broken Arrow, and they were buying a big house, and they had all these kids and all the expenses and paying off student loans, and it was hard. It was hard, and I understood it. So anyway, I talked about tithing as a goal, and it's hard to get there right away, but this year start with a percentage, and next year make it add a point, and work up to it. And, a whole bunch of other things to help them try to get there. And that, there's the standard. We don't bring the standards down to our level of ability to fulfill them. We have a standard and we work toward the standard. Exercising. You don't start off running 10 miles. You work up to that until you get in shape and so forth. Anyway, but this whole question of tithing, I had some questions that if it's 10% of your crop or your produce that goes to the landowner, and then whatever's more is a gift, but how do we interpret that tithe in terms of, is it just the money? If God owns everything, then God owns our time. And is it 10% of my time to be service to God and God's purposes? Or is it like David's saying in this series of sermons, are you all in? God wants all of us, our whole selves. But if we were to tithe our time, 10% would be 2 hours and 24 minutes a day. But if it's only our waking hours, then it's only 1 hour and 36 minutes of our time. And then would that only mean service to the church? Does that time have to be here? Or could I volunteer at the food bank, or Meals on Wheels, or Red Cross, or tutoring at Burroughs? Or could I count my hours in parenting and trying to raise my children to be faithful and unselfish and kind-hearted good citizens in God's world? Could I count that as my tithe? Because that would be more than 10% of my time, because that takes a lot of time. Or in the recycling and taking the extra time to stack the papers and the cans and the glass and aluminum and all of that. Would that count? Or is God's time not service? But relationship time with God, is that talking about prayer time, worship time, reading and studying God's Word, devotional reading for inspiration? And so there's a division of question about that. Could it be only the things that enrich me and my spiritual life? Or is that something separate, and then what's done for others that I get no direct benefit from? It's just given away. For example, a big portion of our gifts to the church support the church. So it's here for us. And then some of it goes away from here. Not for us, but for others. The mission and social services. Well, to get some help from the biblical tradition, there are some other passages. And let's see, here it is. In Genesis 28, 10 to 22, we have more. Jacob and Esau had this misunderstanding of who got the family inheritance, and Jacob tricked his father Isaac, and he gets it, and then Esau is very angry, and so Jacob is running away, and when he's running away, he says, Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set, and taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on earth, and the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending, and the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac, and the land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring, and your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. Anyway, and it goes on, he makes these promises, and then Jacob awoke from his sleep, and he said, surely the Lord is in this place. I did not know it. And he was afraid, and he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took a stone that he had put under his head, and he set it up for a pillar, and he poured oil on top of it, and he called the place Bethel. But the name of the city was Luz at first, and then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be the house of God, and of all that you give me I will surely give 1/10 to you. So that's kind of a thank offering praise, but it's I will in the future. It's not like Abram meeting Melchizedek, I give it 1/10 now. It's in the future. And the scholars tell us that he never fulfilled the promise. In the text, we don't have a place where that ever got fulfilled. And then later, scholars were bothered by that and said, and so they tried to write some things about it, and they said, well, of course he didn't ever fulfill it. This was way before we had the temple and the priests. There was no one to receive the gift. There was no structure for channeling and utilizing the gift. And then they create some way that when that happened, surely he fulfilled the promise. And so, anyway, that was one place where we have that happening. But it is a voluntary offering of promise, even though we don't have it actually happening. And then we have in, let me find the Deuteronomy 12, we have another place where tithe is brought up, that you shall go there and bring there your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and your donations, your votive gifts, your free will offerings, the firstlings of your herds and flocks, and you shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God, and you and your households together, rejoicing in all the undertakings which the Lord has blessed you. In this is an indication that the way the tithes were used was an offering, but it was like a communion meal, and the worshipers brought the food, and they had to bring the offering into the presence of the sanctuary or the temple, and then consume the food and the offerings there in the presence of God. So that in that place, it has a sense of that communal relationship and offering. But then over in a couple of chapters later, they have some more. You shall not eat anything that dies of itself, and give it to the aliens, and so forth. And you shall not boil a kid in his mother's milk. A lot of rules. And then set apart a tithe of all the yield of your seed that is brought in yearly from the field, in the presence of the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose as a dwelling for his name, meaning a temple or sanctuary. And you shall eat the tithe of your grain, your wine, your oil, as well as the firstlings of the herd or flock, so that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. But if, when the Lord your God has blessed you, the distance is so great that you are unable to transport it, because the place where the Lord your God will choose to set his name is too far away from you, then you may turn it into money, and with the money, secure in hand, go to the place that the Lord your God will choose. Spend the money for whatever you wish, oxen, sheep, wine, strong drink, or whatever you desire, and you shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God, you and your household, rejoicing together. As for the Levites resident in your towns, do not neglect them, because they have no allotment or inheritance with you. Every third year you shall bring out the full tithe of your produce for that year, and store it within your towns. The Levites, because they have no allotment or inheritance with you, as well as the resident aliens, the orphans, and the widows in your towns, may come and eat their fill, so the Lord your God may bless you in all the work that you undertake. So within that passage, we've got still the concept of the communal relationship. It's you're supposed to come and worship God, and it's like have a feast or a festival as you worship God and are giving thanks and experiencing and rejoicing in the blessings, in the abundance that have come to you. But then this other part, that also the tithe is used for the widow and the orphan and the stranger in the land, that it isn't just for us, it's for others in need, that God cares about as well. So we have the purpose of the tithe, how it's used is being directed in other places. And let's see, there's another one in Numbers 24. 18:24. And this is a real important one. Then the Lord said to Aaron, you and your sons and your ancestral house with you shall bear responsibility for offenses connected with the sanctuary. Aaron has to be in charge of the sanctuary, and if anything goes wrong, he is responsible. And the Lord spoke to Aaron, I have given you charge over the offerings made to me, all the holy gifts of the Israelites. I have given them to you and your sons as priestly portion due you in perpetuity. This shall be yours from the most holy things reserved from the fire. Every offering, meaning from the fire, those things that aren't burned up in the burnt offerings, every offering of theirs that they render to me as most holy thing or guilt offering shall belong to you and your sons. As a most holy thing you shall eat it. Every male may eat it. It shall be holy to you. This also is yours. I have given to you together with your sons and daughters, and so forth. And then the Lord said to Aaron, you shall have no allotment in their land, nor shall you have any share among them. I am your share and your possession among the Israelites. And then to the Levites I have given every tithe in Israel for a possession in return for the service that they perform, the service in the tent of meeting. And then I give, anyway, the tithe in this place is what it is for the support of the temple and the worship there, and to support the Levites and the priests who run the temple and run the business, as we see when they come up with the idea, when they try to centralize. See, they used to have shrines and temples in Bethel and Gilgal and different places, and then once under a centralized way, they want to have it all in Jerusalem, one temple, one place. Well, not everybody lived in Jerusalem, so that they would have to go to the one place. So they said, well, you can sell the things and get money, and then bring the money and then buy things for the sacrifices. So that set up a whole commercialization of the religious part, and it was kind of necessary to make it happen, but yet then that leads to corruption, because some want to take advantage, and they can overcharge or overvalue the quality of what's being bought and sold, and then the different measurements, because the money system wasn't real precise and so forth. But anyway, as far as the tithe, somebody had to take care of the system of the worship for the people, and the reason for that was simply for the sake of the people and their relationship with God. Someone had to help that happen and had to be there and to be present. If the system involved sacrifices and the collection of offerings, somebody had to be there to receive it. And then the channeling of it to the purposes that were its intent. So it developed a big system that came along. But then, in a little more dealing with this, we see that there were abuses in the system. And in Amos, we have a mention of where he's blasting the Israelites. He says, your tithes every 3 days, but it's kind of confusing in that place where tithes is mentioned, but he gets more understandable over a little farther in the chapter, and he says that the people, they hate the one who reproves in the gate, and they abhor the one who speaks the truth. Therefore, because you trample on the poor and take from them levies of grain, you have built houses of hewn stone, but you shall not live in them. You have planted pleasant vineyards, but you shall not drink their wine, for I know how many are your transgressions and how great are your sins. You who afflict the righteous, who take a bribe, who push aside the needy in the gate. Therefore the prudent will keep silent in such a time, for it is an evil time. But seek good, not evil, that you may live, so that the Lord, the God of hosts, will be with you, just as you have said. Hate evil, love good, and establish justice in the gate. You know, at the gate, that's where the older men would sit, and a lot of times that's where people would bring their problems, and they would ask the wisdom of the elders to help them with their problems. And so it was kind of like a municipal court. There wasn't any authority to enforce necessarily, but it was to get someone to help solve the problem. So at the city gate was a very important place where good things were supposed to be happening for the good of the community. But hate evil, love good, establish justice in the gate. It may be that the Lord, the God of hosts, will be gracious to the remnant of Joseph. And then it goes on, and I hate and I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies, meaning the worship time. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps, but rather let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. So it isn't just the offerings that are the most important, but there must be justice. And this is what is supposed to be happening in the relationship with God, is learning righteousness, learning to do what is just and fair. And then we have the same theme picked up in Luke, with Jesus saying, "But woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and herbs of all kinds, and neglect justice and the love of God. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others, justice rather than the strict tithing of every little thing, even your herbs, little spices. You tithe those, but you don't take care of justice for people." But anyway, we see Jesus carrying that same theme of the prophets. But anyway, on this tithing, there are some other issues that come up, and that is, one of them, the strangers in the land and supporting them. It was often, I would think, more than just the shepherds who were looking for green pastures or water and so forth. But I think a lot of times strangers in the land could have well been what we would call today political refugees, because whenever there's a battle and a fight, either the enemy is all put to death or enslaved. And if you can get away from the battle and go home and gather up your family and run away, sort of like Joseph and Mary ran away to Egypt in the birth narratives at Christmas time in order to escape some evil. In essence, they were political refugees to Egypt. And so a lot of the refugees could have well been what we would call today political refugees trying to escape. And they would be in the land. And so when you leave everything, you don't have anything when you arrive. And so you're in a very desperate situation. And so being Hebrews, the folks who are strangers in the land is to remind them always that these people are in need. And just because we don't, like often happens today, we blame the victim. Well, it's your own fault. You made a lot of stupid choices. So why should I help you? Because it's your own fault. Well, so often it's not their own fault. Sometimes it is, but so often it's not. And we aren't to automatically blame the victim, but try to be responsive and try to help. So on the tithing, there are... Okay. I can't find where I had another thought or two. Oh, here it is. One of the things on the tithe is 10% of all you own. Now, if you do that once in a lifetime, like with your estate, at your estate, in your estate, you put in your will or your trust, 10% goes to these charities, and then the rest will go to the relatives. Is that the only time, or is the tithe 10% of your income? All that you own is just sitting there, but what you receive each year or each week or whenever you get income, is it only 10% of that? And then we have this first fruits of the harvest. Is that in addition to the 10%? Or is the 10% supposed to be the first 10% and the best, the unblemished lamb? For example, I garden, and if I go out and pick 10 tomatoes one day, I need to give. I usually do. I bring a load of tomatoes up here and pass it out to staff. So I'm more than tithing my harvest of tomatoes at the church, in the sanctuary, having a feast. I bring them to staff meeting and pass them out, and we cut them up and eat them with lunch sometimes when they're in season. But is it that kind of thing that is supposed to happen? Is just whenever we have a blessing of something in our lives, as a thank, we take a part of that and we share it some way as that communal meal, and in doing so, thank you, God, as a part of the sharing. I've been blessed, and I want to share with you, and to acknowledge that, to represent that, then this is the way I do it. It's not just lip service, but it's an action that not only symbolizes but demonstrates that aspect of what the tithe was meant to do. But then there is the tithe and support of the Levites and the priests in order to keep the temple and the sanctuary and the worship setting functioning well. And also for here at Boston Avenue, there is an issue of... they came up with it. I thought it was kind of weird when I first heard it. Anybody ever heard of buildings evangelism? Buildings evangelism. Well, what it means is if you're going to proclaim the gospel and you're going to do that, you need a building. But the building that you build should be beautiful and to God's glory. And I think that's happened pretty well here at Boston Avenue with our church. There are some places where churches are getting started and they're in a strip shopping mall, and it's hard to distinguish a church in that setting from the other businesses. Now, a lot of them have to do it that way to get started, and we understand that. But I saw, I think it was on Garnett, there was a church that had gotten started building, and it just came to a stop. It was halfway up, and there were weeds growing around. It was still an active church, but it just stopped. It was half built. And it went on for years. Now, in buildings evangelism would say, that's terrible, because what that image says, here's a church in big trouble. I don't know what the trouble is, but if they can't finish their building and it's all going to weeds, I don't want to go there. I'm going to get embroiled in whatever that trouble is. I want the gospel to enlighten me and empower me and inspire me. I mean, that looks like a big problem. And churches that don't paint their signs, they're all weather beaten. It's just saying, well, we don't really care if you can find us or not. So you need a good sign out front that says, we're here. Not only we're here, but God is here with us, inspiring us, energizing us, helping us grow and learn and to be generous and giving and helpful. And the other part is that if the people will care enough and take care of the building, then they'll probably take care of me and my needs. But if they can't see the building's needs, it needs painting, the lawn needs mowing, the garden needs cleaning out. If they can't recognize those needs, if I come in all beat up and bloody, they may not see that either. And so, anyway, it sends images and ideas. But in order for those things to happen, there need to be the resources. So how much? Well, the resources, the biblical term is the tithe, is the standard. It becomes the goal toward which we will try to grow and to build. So, if you haven't been to worship, David's going to ask you again, are you all in? And how do you measure whether I'm all in? Well, the tithe is one of those measurements as far as how much to give, but also the all in is there aren't really that many limits on how much you're supposed to think about God and so forth, because that relationship building time, the prayer time, the worship time,